Well, my name's Jill. I've got 2 children, Lily, who's at school, and my little boy Toby, who's not quite at school yet. I've also got 4 cats and 2 goldfish, and I'm a working mother as well. The learning zone is really useful for us. We use science programs for my little girl. It's easy for me to help her with her English and maths. We do plenty of reading together, but science isn't one of the subjects that has particular interest to me. So it's really nice for me to have something that I can start off with that we can then work through together and understand together.
Now on BBC Learning Zone, some useful...
The return of their migrant husbands. Those men who've contracted the disease in the cities will come back and infect their wives. The divisions between the sexes in India makes education about AIDS difficult. This villager has been trained as a health educator. He's explaining to returning migrant workers how they're putting their wives at risk. Like Isaac Matina in Zambia, because he's local, it's more likely the villagers will listen to what he has to say.
We also explained to the women how you get AIDS. Some were visibly upset. Lots of men go to Bombay and have other partners. The women started to have suspicions and asked whether their husbands were doing the same. Even though they were embarrassed, some women still asked me, "Can you tell whether our husbands are being unfaithful? When they come back, will we get this disease? What can we do?" There is nothing you can do to cure AIDS. There's only waiting for death. That is why every woman should know how to have safe sex. When you use a condom, you must make sure it's good quality. Check if the quality is good or not. Even if you get a good quality one, you must make sure it's used properly.
We have to get the wheel moving, and someone has to be able to get people to look at one another as individuals and have respect for one another, and especially the Indian woman. I mean, because for a lot of Indian women, simply being married is risk for HIV, and that is a very frightening thought.
However effective, all these are small projects which can only reach a few people. To face a future with AIDS realistically, these efforts need to be repeated countrywide, worldwide.
How do computer hackers guess your password, and what can you do to stop them? BBC Learning Zone explains how to secure your computer now in Hackers, Crackers and Worms.
Well, I remember the 88 worm incident quite well, in part because of all of the work that it caused, but also the date. It was released on my wedding anniversary. The next morning, I couldn't log into my computer system. And that was how I first discovered that the worm had gotten on our machine.
A Cornell University graduate student whose father is a top government computer security expert is suspected of creating the virus that has clogged thousands of military and research computers across the nation. But school officials say they doubt there was any intent to cause damage. NBC's Robert Hager has more.
Cornell University said the virus was apparently spawned by the computer of one of its graduate students, 23-year-old Robert Morris, Jr.
The worm program was designed to spread to other computer systems. And so when it started running on one computer, the first thing it would attempt to do is find nearby machines that it would find it easy to get into. It would spread to those machines. Then it would try to find other targets, possibly somewhat farther afield. And it would then establish copies of itself on those machines. Unfortunately, the program might establish itself multiple times on the current machine, because machines far away might send copies of the worm program to it. The result is we'd have a computer system running dozens, perhaps scores of this worm program, tying up the computer system, tying up the file, tying up the network, to the point where the machine was simply overwhelmed. It had no more capacity, and in some cases the machine just stopped processing entirely. It crashed.
The worm virus of 1988 infected at least 1 in 10 of the computers on the internet and caused massive disruption worldwide. Could it happen again? Just how safe are computer networks now? What are the threats posed by malicious and damaging software, such as worms and viruses? And how do you stop computer hackers from vandalizing the network?
We now have in the tens of millions of machines and users around the world. We have absolutely no idea who all is on the network and what they're doing.
The Internet owes its birth to the Cold War. The US military experimented with a communications network that would operate no matter how many sites were destroyed during an attack. Messages could be routed along any existing path, not necessarily the most direct one. As it grew, this massively interconnected network became known as the Internet. The Internet's distributed structure meant that central control was impossible. Its anarchic community relied on self-regulation and trust. The worm Robert Morris released showed just how vulnerable computers on the net were when that trust broke down. Since 1988, the Internet has expanded rapidly. Commerce has dictated the growth of computer networking within companies and between them. As familiar high street institutions with sensitive data, such as banks and hospitals, join the Internet, security has become a priority. Increasingly, computer data controls our lives, but who controls the data? The challenge for system designers is to provide security mechanisms which prevent attack on their computers, while at the same time allowing authorized traffic to pass freely across the network. To achieve these conflicting goals, engineers borrow some ideas from the past.
There's a particularly good parallel between castles and computer systems. We have a drawbridge, we have a gate, and we have guards.
The physical defences of a castle are a good model for understanding the software security of a computer. We'll examine the parallels in detail later. To begin, though, it's helpful to look beyond the castle walls at the world outside our control.
An organisation is seldom within one building, and it wants to send messages between the various sites. If you take the analogy of a castle, it's a bit like having to connect your castles with roads and finding that the security of the castle isn't breached, but any messengers you send between the castles get ambushed on the way.
To achieve guaranteed delivery across the internet, messages are broken down and sent out in small packets. Each packet is given a number and its own copy of the final address, so they can be sent independently via different routes. At the destination, they are assembled in the correct order to reform the original message. It's tempting to think of this message delivery as an electronic version of the postal network we're so familiar with, but there are some important differences. The post office has a long history. We have a pretty good idea of how it works, and we trust it. The same cannot be said about the internet.
If I post you a letter, I'm trusting the Royal Mail, but I know I'm not to a great extent trusting lots and lots of organisations. If I send a message out onto the internet, I'm trusting maybe hundreds of organisations because I don't know what route my message will take, and I'm therefore trusting a large number of strangers.
It's passed through a whole load of people that you have no knowledge about.
On the internet, the packets are effectively being written on the back of electronic postcards. And they're pretty well open for anybody who cares to look at them, to read them, to understand them, and perhaps even to forge them and introduce fake messages.
It is possible to protect the data as it crosses the network using encryption.
Encryption is a process of transforming information from its normal usable form into a scrambled form that is not usable by anybody who isn't in possession of particular secret keys that can be used to unscramble it.
Cryptography and encryption dates back thousands of years. And the word cryptography comes from the Greek, meaning secret writing.
It is the only way known, and in a sense maybe the only way imaginable, for people to control information that is out of their physical possession.
An example of early encryption is transposing letters to produce a secret version of a message. But such simple codes were easy to crack. So more complex codes were developed that required more effort to break. In World War II, the Germans transmitted their military communications in a code that was virtually impossible to crack. Messages were encrypted using an electromechanical device known as the Enigma machine. A crucial factor in the Allied victory was decoding the German Enigma messages. This immense task was achieved at Bletchley Park, itself one of the best-kept secrets of the war. Breaking down the Enigma code required a huge computational effort. It was only possible to decipher so many messages because fragments of the code necessary to decrypt or unscramble a message were captured from German military units. The Enigma story shows a fundamental weakness of all traditional encryption methods, namely that the code, the key, to reverse the encryption process must be sent out to someone who wants to read a message. Anyone, friend or foe, who has possession of a copy of the encryption key can unlock the coded message. Imagine that Alice wants to send a secret message across the internet to her friend Bob. Alice can encrypt the text to keep it secret, but so that Bob can read it, she must also send a copy of the encryption key to him. The link between Alice and Bob may not be secure. Someone may be eavesdropping on the line. Using a secret code key, Alice encrypts her message and sends it to Bob. Eve also captures the message. When Alice sends a copy of the encryption key to Bob, he can decode the message, but Eve, who also gets the key to unlock the message, can read it too.
So if you keep the key secure, the messages will be secure. If you lose the key, the messages will be lost. It transfers the problem from one of moving the messages around to one of moving the key around.
Today, this problem with handling code keys has been solved by a technique known as public key cryptography. The coding relies on difficult mathematics, but fortunately, the principle is easier to understand.
Public key cryptosystems are to some extent similar to the way you'd use a night safe at a bank, where the bank gives out a large number of keys which are in fact identical to lots of shopkeepers within a city. Those shopkeepers might want to deposit their takings, so they go to the safe, unlock the door and put their money in. What they don't want is for some rival company to come along with their key, open the safe and take the money out. But what actually happens is the money falls down a chute into a safe within the bank, and the bank has a different key which they then use to unlock the night safe and take the money out. The idea being that having access to the key that allows you to put things into a night safe does not allow you to take things out of a night safe.
In a public key system, we have two entirely different keys. And the trick to it is that it's very difficult to find one key from the other.
The pair of code keys have different but complementary functions. One of the keys can only encrypt data, like the shopkeeper's public keys for the night safe, which can only deposit money. The other key is the only one that can decrypt the message. It's like the bank's unique private key for withdrawing money from the night safe. Now suppose that Bob has a pair of such code keys. He gives away copies of the key that can only encrypt messages to everyone. So this is known as his public key. Bob doesn't even mind if a copy goes to Eve. Alice now encrypts her message to Bob using his public key. But only Bob's personal private key can decrypt this message. Since Bob never had to transmit his private key, no one else, including Eve, can read the message.
So that's entirely analogous to the very free ability we have in the mail system to take an envelope and write an address on it and seal a letter in it and send it off, with pretty good assurance that only the person we're sending it to is going to get it, be able to open it and read it. The other thing that we can do with public key systems is, curious enough, analogous to the other thing we do with letters, which is we sign them. You will be able to recognize from the fact that it was encrypted with my private key that only I could have sent it to you.
Public key encryption has been implemented in many different software packages. An example is PGP, Pretty Good Privacy. Such software makes secure communications available to everyone. The encrypted text is virtually impossible to crack, even working at it for years using the most powerful computers currently available. So, messages can pass along the internet with a degree of safety greater than that of the postal network. But encryption, no matter how strong, is not the solution to all security problems. It's still necessary to protect computers against threats that may hide inside a message, or against the strangers who may come knocking at the computer's door.
What's your password?
Albatross.
Okay.
The traditional method of determining friend or foe is the password challenge. Knowing the correct password grants entry to the system. It's a technique that's been universally adopted by software designers. But how secure is it? Who might be trying to guess your password?
The state of the internet today is that it provides very easy access to almost any computer hooked up to it anywhere on the planet. You could be working on a computer in California and be attacked by someone from Europe or Australia in another time zone. Maybe they're working while you're asleep.
Imagine I want to break into a computer over the internet. By some means, I've managed to steal a copy of its password file, for instance from some network database server. And if we look at the entries that are stored in this password file, we find users, for instance, like Paul Turner here, who works in the student union, if this is a university. His username is Turner, and here is his encrypted password string. Now, I cannot mechanically reverse this password into what the original text is. What I must do to try and break into this machine is fire a dictionary of words at this entry and at all the other entries in the password file to try and find a user who has chosen a weak password, one that is based upon a dictionary word. So what I'll do is launch a password cracking program which loads a dictionary of 1,000,000 words and tries other words based on the user's name, like Paul Turner, Paul T, Turner P, variations on that theme. It takes these words and encrypts them using the same algorithm that is used to generate the data in the password file, and compares the two. And when it finds a match, it prints out the text of the password that it used to generate this string. This gives us the information we need to break into the remote computer. For instance, here we found a user, Sindana L, who has chosen a password, Sindana L with a capital C. With this piece of information, I can then break into the remote computer, and once I'm on that computer, I can do anything I like.
Aardvark, Aardwolf, Abba.
Abast, Abalone.
This method of cracking a password is called a dictionary attack. As processor power grows, it becomes a trivial task to test a huge number of words. Eventually, the hacker is likely to crack at least one password. But does that really matter?
Zionism. The importance of password security is that once somebody is in, as you are inside this castle, you can do almost anything. You have access to the secret rooms, you are past most of the lines of defense. Once you are in, you can then start prodding around, looking for weaknesses that will get you further into the inner sanctums where all the important information is kept. You can go around, create havoc and destroy things. There is a difference between computing and real life. A single person inside a castle cannot theoretically create very much havoc. But once you have a single entry point for somebody into a computer, due to sometimes bugs in the software, due to misconfigurations of the operating system software, there are many weaknesses that can be exploited to become the super user of the computer, a person with absolute rights and absolute privileges over all data, to destroy things, change things, modify things. And this is the situation that needs to be avoided. You should avoid choosing guessable passwords. By this I mean, for instance, something related to your name, to your surname, to the city in which you live, something which can be gleaned from the information which the computer is likely to hold about you.
We've made sure that people set a minimum length to their passwords, and they didn't choose words that you could find in a dictionary. We've seen a drastic reduction in the number of calls we've had from customers as a result of break-ins since then, which we believe indicates that password security in the past has been a major problem in systems.
It's crucial to improve a computer's defense against the hackers, because if they can breach the security, there are plenty of weapons that hackers can use to steal or destroy data.
There are a number of kinds of software that can run on their own and affect a computer system without the owner's permission. The most commonly known is the computer virus.
A computer virus is a piece of software attached to something that in itself is perfectly harmless, but which when executed on your system actually affects other things happening on that system. It may delete files, it may otherwise corrupt your system. What it will also do is spread itself to other pieces of software on your system, much like a biological virus.
A Trojan horse is a program which pretends to interact with the user in the way that the user expects. For instance, if you are connecting to a remote machine and it asks you to log in and supply your password, a Trojan horse might be a program pretending to be the login program. Something which takes a copy of your password and stashes it away for future reference, and then connects you to the machine.
The idea of the Trojan horse may come from Greek mythology, but today it's a real device used for stealing secret data. The concept works in software and hardware too.
In just 5 weeks, over £120,000 was stolen from at least 100 Halifax Building Society accounts. At the heart of the scam, a homemade Halifax cash machine, which recorded card and PIN numbers from unsuspecting customers.
Worms are programs which replicate across a network through infection without requiring some human transport or without necessarily requiring somebody to actually execute an infected program. Worms hop from machine to machine.
They may not try to delete a file or read information. They may just simply attempt to spread. The Internet worm of '88 was basically a program of that type.
There is a way to stop worms hopping into a computer, or viruses and Trojan horses getting in by hiding inside a message. It's similar to how a moat protects a castle from intruders. In computer networks, such a defense is called a firewall. But a firewall is more than just a barrier. Like the castle moat, it also has a gate.
A firewall for an organisation is very much like the moat and the castle walls that we're standing in here. It's a defence around the organisation. Basically, its job is to make sure that the only people who go in and out of the network, just as the moat and the walls do here, go through the main entrance. Let's think about the gate at the castle here. We could allow people to walk freely in and out. The firewall would take each of those people coming in into a separate room, perhaps search them, ask them questions and so on, before actually allowing them to go through. It's very difficult to build a firewall that can examine every individual bit of every byte of every piece of data that comes in and out of the network. We have to draw the line somewhere.
If there are untrustworthy people within your organisation, then the firewall doesn't protect you very much. It's a bit like being in a castle and you've got a lovely set of defences around the outside of you, but if somebody inside opens the door, then your security can be breached. In a similar way, somebody within your company can breach the security of the firewall.
With all its limitations, a firewall does provide increased security for large computer installations. But it's not possible to transform every computer on the internet into a fortress. What about home users? How worried should they be about security?
I think if you use your PC in the way people normally use their PCs, you shouldn't be terribly worried.
But it is possible for people who use a machine at home to read email to be sent a program encoded in some way which they can download, run, execute, and that program might contain a virus or something generally nasty which will infect their machine, trash data. You have to judge whether or not you trust the data that comes to you down a network.
I would be very wary about running a piece of software unless I knew exactly where it came from. If I get a piece of software from a large, well-known company, one of the reasons I go to that large, well-known company is if they do something wrong, I can sue them for it.
There are many companies these days who are distributing their software through the internet. It's a perfectly valid way of distributing software, and as long as you take normal, reasonable precautions, for example, virus scanning that software, I don't believe there's any additional threat.
If you're a home user and you are worried about security, keep regular backups of your data. Duplicate everything onto some magnetic tape or some other storage device so that you've always got copies when something goes wrong. Because security is not merely an issue of viruses and hackers and Trojan horses and worms. It is also things like power supplies and disk drives failing. Hardware can be replaced, data cannot, so back it up.
If you are concerned about security, either before or after a break-in, there is a source of help and information that anyone on the internet can turn to.
The Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT, is there to help sites improve the security of their computer systems. None of the CERT teams have any powers of law enforcement. The police are the only people that can enforce the law. But the CERT team might be better thought of as perhaps neighbourhood watch or victim support.
This neighbourhood watch brings together the guardians of computer networks in an attempt to lock out the hackers. What has this experience taught them about the threat the hackers pose?
The majority of hackers are not best described as wizards. They have very little skills in general. The majority of them are following recipes that they have acquired from other troublemakers, and they just follow these recipes without understanding why they work. The majority of burglars are opportunists. They might break a window or find a door that's unlocked, but the burglar that can pick a lock is very rare. In the same way, the hackers that can create the new scripts, the new recipes for breaking into systems are also very rare.
How does the accomplished hacker generate the new recipes to attack systems? To the architect, the castle appears impenetrable. Every attack that was thought of has a countermeasure. But what if the attackers don't think in the same way as the architect?
A lot of people who are in, responsible positions in corporations don't have the frame of mind exactly that they would want to go off and attack systems. But you have to approach it as an intellectual problem and ask yourself the question, how would I go about attacking this and what vulnerabilities are present?
To question security measures, designers must learn to look beyond the mental picture that they develop for a system. Analogies like the castle are useful to illustrate defense mechanisms, such as passwords and firewalls. But these mechanisms aren't really what they pretend to be. They exist only as software, ones and zeros, inside the computer, and any software has its own unique weaknesses. It's a lesson that often has to be learnt through bitter experience. Those that have suffered from stupid pranks or malicious attacks have their own lesson to teach the hackers.
Computers aren't a game. They're a tool. We use them to conduct our business, to conduct our personal lives, to run government, to run societies. And it's important that we can trust in the results and in their behavior. We should never view computer security as a game.
It's been a hard day, yes.
Within the United Kingdom and most countries around the world, it is a criminal offence to use a computer system without permission. It is common for hackers to be sent to prison for a first offence.
The Open University has a scheme allowing other organisations to use recordings of its programmes for teaching and training. For more details, ring 01908 858 766 or visit the website at www.ouw.co.uk.
Discover the power of knowledge with the Open University on BBC Learning Zone. Through the Night on BBC Two.
Now BBC Learning Zone takes a mathematical look at the practicalities of building houses that are heated by the sun.
Welcome to Pennyland for the last time in this series of television programmes. Now, in the previous programme, you saw how Pennyland could be seen as a natural extension or development from the Better Insulated House scheme. Now, in this scheme, if you remember, we looked at one particular experiment in detail, and that was at Whitburn, and we learnt lessons from that. But we also drew general lessons from the Better Insulated House programme. In particular, we found that you can't look at one conservation feature in isolation. You also have to study how they work together. For example, we looked at the conservation due to insulation and found that the potential conservation wasn't completely realised because the heating system and its control were also very important in determining gas consumption. So in Pennyland then, we're going to look at all these features as studied in the Better Insulated House programme, but we're also going to examine the effects of glazing and orientation on gas consumption. And this is going to be for real lived-in houses. Well, with all these conservation features happening at once in this experiment, it's very difficult to disentangle which feature does what. And of course, we certainly haven't got time in one television programme to investigate all these things. And so, in this programme, we're going to take a first look at the effect of window area and orientation. If you remember, some houses at Pennyland have large windows on the south side with very small windows on the north. These are called single aspect houses. Others have about equal glazing north and south. These are called dual aspect houses and are somewhat like typical houses. Well, you've all been in a greenhouse on a sunny day, and you know that the sun coming through windows can warm you up. So our physical intuition is that the houses with single aspect, i.e. with glazing facing south predominantly, should gain free heat from the sun. Now, in trying to answer this question of free heat gain from the sun, we will come across many practical problems which experimenters encounter in cases like Pennyland. As well as this, we will have to use techniques which you've learnt about and seen in earlier parts of the course, so I hope it's useful revision for your exams too. Well, back to our question. Can we pick up useful solar energy through glazing? To answer this question, we have to look in our estate here at Pennyland to find houses which differ significantly only in the glazing that they have. And in fact, at this stage of the experiment, we've been able to find data on 13 dual aspect houses and 17 single aspect houses. Of course, these houses differ significantly in that they have different people in them, but we're hoping that the samples of these houses are large enough that we can statistically control for this factor. We'll see. Now, we have the annual gas consumptions for these samples of 13 and 17. Can we use this data to answer the question, can we pick up free, useful solar heating through windows such as these?
We've got the total gas consumption figures here for the 13 dual aspect and the 17 single aspect houses. There are also electricity figures for most of these, but we're going to concentrate only on the gas. Now this back-to-back stem plot might suggest that the single aspect houses use slightly less gas than the dual aspect houses. But it's far from clear cut, and it might just be due to chance. To see if there is a significant difference between the gas consumption of these two kinds of house, we need to perform some sort of hypothesis test. But which one? Remember, you've got a chart in Unit C5 which helps you with just such a question. It helps you to decide which test to use in a particular situation. It starts off by asking what kind of data you've got: categorical, ordinal, or interval. Well, these are real numerical figures. You can work out exactly how much more gas one house used than another, so we go for interval scale data. Now, how many samples are there? 1 or 2? Of course, there are 2, dual and single aspect. But the chart asks whether the samples are paired or not. Well, are they? No, they're not paired in any way, so we go for the 2 not paired box. What's the next decision? Are the samples large or small? If they're large, that means we do a 2-sample Z test. And if they're small, it's a 2-sample T test. Well, there's 13 in one sample and 17 in the other. We've been taking a figure of more than 25 as being a large enough sample for a Z test. So on that basis, these count as small. So it looks like a 2-sample T test is what we need. But remember, you can only do a T test if you assume normal populations. And it's not so clear that the dual data here is normally distributed. Do we risk it? Well, remember that even if the data is on an interval scale, we can still use tests that work on ordinal data. So let's see what possibilities that has to offer before we commit ourselves. Well, again, the first decision is about the number of samples and whether they're paired. And the answer is just the same as before. We go for the 2 not paired box. Then we've got to decide whether the samples are large or small. We can use a Mann-Whitney test so long as the samples aren't so large that the calculations become unwieldy. Otherwise, we might have to do a Moore's median test. Well, we've got sample sizes of 13 and 17, and that's certainly small enough for a Mann-Whitney. Now, because the Mann-Whitney test doesn't rely on the data being normally distributed, it seems a better choice than the t-test for this data. So we'll go for Mann-Whitney. Well, of course, you've done lots of Mann-Whitney tests before in Block B. And you've probably realized by now that this is the data we asked you to work on before the program. So you should already have the results. Briefly, the hypotheses are: null hypothesis, the population medians for gas consumption in dual and single aspect houses are equal. Alternative hypothesis, the population median for dual aspect houses is greater than the median for the single aspect. In other words, the dual aspect houses use more gas. Now, when I came to do the calculations, I got these results. The test statistic, U, turned out to be 103. If you didn't get that, check afterwards. From the table, the critical value was 70. Because the test statistic isn't less than 70, it's not in the critical region. We can't reject H0. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means we haven't found sufficient evidence in this data to reject the null hypothesis that single aspect houses and dual aspect houses use the same amount of energy in practice. And there are basically two reasons this might have occurred. Firstly, perhaps there isn't a difference. Secondly, perhaps there is really a difference, but we just haven't found it. We've made a type 2 error. Now, perhaps this could occur because the variability introduced by the different occupants has swamped the effect of window distribution. Which of these is it? Well, we can't tell from this data. But remember Mark's point about the greenhouse. Intuition tells us that all that south-facing glass must collect some useful heat. And after all, these Pennyland samples here aren't very big. Perhaps they just aren't big enough to show us the difference, and we have made a type 2 error. Well, is that pure conjecture? Or can we look elsewhere for evidence to support this hunch?
You may remember from an earlier television programme, we mentioned another passive solar housing experiment here in Milton Keynes. And here we are, it's at Great Linford. Now in this experiment, there are fewer houses, but they're measured and monitored in far greater detail than at Pennyland. Just like at Pennyland, different people live in these houses and affect the energy consumption. But here at Linford, there's one house we don't have to worry about the people. And the reason is, of course, nobody lives here. So in this house at Great Linford, we can do experiments without the complication of people. We can actually look at the physical processes in the house. And to do that, we can use scientific apparatus, and it doesn't get in the way. Now, the test house here at Linford is just like the single aspect house at Pennyland. All the glazing, or the most of the glazing, is concentrated on the south side of the house. Now, if you remember, our physical intuition was that sunlight coming through the windows will help warm the house. Now, on a sunny day, therefore, we should use less energy than on a cloudy day. In order to answer this question, what we have to do is an experiment. Well, what did this experiment consist of? What we did was to measure the performance of the house over a 10-week period. First of all, inside the house, we kept the inside temperature up to, in fact, it was about 21 centigrade, with fan heaters controlled thermostatically. We also measured the energy that went into running these fan heaters. And so we knew the energy consumption required to keep the house up to a certain temperature. Now, as well as these measurements inside the house, we also have to measure the external conditions. And in order to do that, we have these temperature sensors in the box over here. And on top of the box, you can see the solar radiation measuring equipment. So we've made our measurements outside and inside the house. What does this data tell us?
Well, here's a scattergram based on measurements taken from that experiment. Up here, we're plotting the amount of energy needed each day to keep the house at its constant temperature, and we call that E. And along here, we're plotting the amount of energy coming in from the sun and falling on every square metre each day, and we call that S. And each of these points here is the average of a whole week's readings. Well, it's not really very clear exactly what kind of relationship, if any, this is showing. Maybe there's a slight negative slope, but it's certainly not too clear. If we try fitting a straight line to the data, then we'll get some quantitative measure of which way it's going. Well, here's the data, and here's the straight line, and this is its equation. In fact, it's the sub-batch median fit line. If you want some practice for the exam, this data's in the unit, and you can check the fit for yourself. Now, this line suggests that there's a negative relationship. It says that when the sun's not shining, S is going to be low, and so there's a relatively high value of E. The house is using more energy. When the sun is shining, S is larger, which means that E is a bit smaller. Energy consumption drops. And that's just what our intuition tells us should happen. But this fit really is very poor, and if you take away this point here, it's not even clear that it should be negative. So this is hardly the clear evidence we were hoping for. Well, is our intuition wrong, or are we overlooking something? Now, these are the various factors that we said in the last programme had a direct bearing on the energy consumption of a house. What bearing do these have on the Linford experiment? Well, the house is totally unoccupied, so people have no effect. We can forget that. And as for these three, house design, heating system, and location, there's only one house and it acts as its own control, so we can forget those. Now, as for weather, we split it into temperature difference between the inside and the outside of the house, and the solar radiation, that's what we call S. The effect of the solar radiation is the thing we're trying to establish experimentally But what about temperature difference? Shouldn't we be doing something about that? Although the temperature inside the house was kept steady, the outside temperature must have been going up and down like a yo-yo over the 10 weeks. And you know the changes in the temperature difference affect the energy consumption. If we could compensate for the effect of varying temperature difference, then maybe we'd see the relationship between energy consumption and solar radiation more clearly. In fact, that illustrates a very important point. One of the stages of statistical modeling is making sure you clarify your question. When we asked if there was a relationship between E and S, it wasn't really a clearly defined question. We should have asked, all other things being equal, is there a relationship between E and S? Well, the temperature difference certainly wasn't equal. So is there any way to compensate for its variation? Well, it's quite easy, really. When we set about finding a straight line fit to this data, we were implicitly assuming that a fit equation of this type could describe the relationship between E and S. It's just the equation of a straight line. We found that the gradient, A, equals minus 2.126, and the intercept, that's C, equals 54.6. Now, the straight line doesn't fit very well. So clearly, this doesn't adequately describe the relationship. Now, we think that's because temperature difference comes in somewhere. So why not extend this idea and look at a fit equation like this? It's just the same sort of equation. It's still got the A times S and the C. But we've added this term here to try to take account of temperature difference. It's acknowledging that E is affected by both S and by the temperature difference, TD. Well, at the same time as they were measuring E and S, the experimenters were also measuring temperature difference. So they obtained data giving corresponding values of these three quantities, E, S, and TD, for each of the 10 weeks of the experiment. Now, it's something that's not taught in this course, but given the data, it's possible to compute values for A, B, and C in much the same way as you computed just A and C in the simple straight line fit. Well, when that's done, these are the values that come out. A is minus 16.3, B is 6.74, and C turns out to be minus 5.97. Okay, but is this a better fit than the one we looked at before? We need to look at the residuals. One way to do that goes like this. We can rearrange this equation to get TD over to the other side, and that gives us this. All we've done is subtract 6.74 TD from both sides, so it goes away on this side, and over here we're left with E minus 6.74 TD. Now we can think of this side of the equation as being a sort of adjusted energy consumption, adjusted for the effects of temperature difference. So we call it adjusted E. Well, this just says that adjusted E equals something times S minus something else. It's the equation of a straight line. But does it describe the data well? We've got some data, and we've got a fit line. Here's a scattergram of adjusted E against S. Here are the data points with their E values adjusted. Here's the fit line, and there's no doubt about it, the data falls close to the line, and the residuals are all pretty small. So this fit describes the pattern in the data much better than our other attempt did. So what have we shown? We've shown that once the effect of varying temperature difference has been allowed for, then a very strong relationship appears between energy consumption and solar radiation. And it's negative, as we would have expected. Well, this gives the clear evidence that we were looking for. It gives weight to our suspicion that there really is a difference between dual and single aspect houses in Pennyland, and that the data we used really did just fail to show up that difference. But shouldn't Pennyland have picked the difference up? Well, a few weeks ago, I spoke to David Bartholomew, who's from the Energy Technology Support Unit of the Department of Energy. I asked him if he could tell me something about how the Pennyland experiment came to be designed the way it was.
In the early 1970s, Milton Keynes Development Corporation was looking at a wide range of the issues arising in the creation of a very large new town, and one of those was energy. The experiment was very much the brainchild of the Development Corporation and the Energy Research Group at the Open University. And by the time they got to the point of wanting to come to the Department of Environment and Department of Energy for money to do the job, they'd looked at quite a lot of different options for the design of the estate and the design of the experiment. And we tried for some time to simplify the experiment and concentrate the comparisons into a few major comparisons which would give us a better handle on the most important of the numbers. That was the basis on which the experiment first got underway actively, I think. That was our mutual understanding of it at the time that it started. In fact, subsequently, it's turned out that there are detailed differences within what we thought were homogeneous groups, which mean that we're now back to the sort of sample sizes that were in mind originally.
That's the small ones.
The small ones. But fortunately, our understanding of analytic techniques has moved on also, and we can probably now handle the smaller samples and still extract the information that we want.
Well, is it possible to say in what other ways the experiment's deviating from what you might call the ideal?
There were several different groups of people involved in the work, and they were all professionals in their own field, and perhaps we all trusted each other a little bit more than we should have done, so that assumptions about issues like the equality of window areas between different groups of houses were made without the evidence having been checked.
Well, in this television programme, I hope you'll have gained some understanding of the practical difficulties involved with an experiment like this. In particular, we found that the single aspect houses have a slightly larger wall area than the dual aspect houses, and so they have larger heat loss. In future analysis, we will account for this, but it does show the kinds of problems we come up with. Well, you might be wondering, with all these difficulties, why do we do the experiments? Well, I still think they're worthwhile. Pennyland here has already shown that with cost-effective measures, we can reduce the energy consumption of houses by a large extent. Furthermore, these experiments are used to set up building regulations for this country. The thermal regulations have progressively increased through time, to such an extent, in fact, that invents are already overtaking this estate. Building regulations now specify insulation levels similar to the well-insulated houses here. Houses use about 10 or 15% of the primary energy of our country, so by insulation measures such as these, we can use less of our precious fuel reserves. I hope in this programme you've seen that experiments like these, although difficult to do, are interesting and produce useful results. And I also hope that through the previous television programmes you've seen how statistical analysis can help you with general energy decisions. Finally, I hope that throughout the course you've found that statistical techniques which you've learnt will be useful to you, and I hope also you've seen how they can be useful generally in society.
more details about the Open University, you can ring us on 01908 653 231.
There are invisible forces at work now on BBC Learning Zone in Keywords.
Magnetism. Magnetism is always associated with electricity, and anything magnetic always has two poles. The like poles repel. The unlike poles attract each other, and this is how we recognize magnetism. In permanent magnets, like the little discs used to fix a shopping list to the fridge door, the electricity is hidden away inside the atoms. But exactly the same effects can be produced by an electric current in a coil of wire. This link was discovered by Michael Faraday. He also found that a changing magnetic field produces a current in a conductor, a vital connection and the basis of the whole electrical industry.
Black hole. A region in space from within which no light can escape. Stars are supported by gas pressure when they're hot, but when they eventually cool down, they contract under their own weight. Gravity is so strong that the outside of the star is pulled towards the centre. It collapses inwards. If the star is massive enough to start with, this process continues until we lose sight of it. It's collapsed within a tiny sphere, only about 5 kilometers in diameter, called the event horizon. Gravity has become so strong that even light can't escape, so it looks like a black hole. The thing is, there's no direct evidence that black holes actually exist. Scientists believe they're theoretically possible, and there is some indirect evidence. There are 10 cases of a visible star rotating round a massive, compact but unseen companion, which could be a black hole. If they exist, then the future for everything in the universe is to fall into a black hole. Their gravity will be so strong that eventually nothing will be able to resist their attraction.
Well, I must say, that one turned, didn't it?
When a cricket ball is old and battered and the pitch is a bit bare and lumpy, the spinner gets to work. The art of spinning is to bowl the ball slowly enough for it to hit the pitch and deviate off a straight line, but to keep the batsman guessing as to which way it will move. When bowling to a right-handed batsman, an off break moves from left to right, or from off to leg, whereas a leg break moves from right to left or from leg to off. Obviously this is reversed with a left-handed batsman at the crease.
And he's gone. That looked a real good one because it turned sharply and it seemed to hurry off the wicket and left a bit.
Even more confusing, not least for the batsman, is the top spinner, which looks like a leg break, but instead goes straight on and bounces higher.
He's out! 10 wickets to Laker.
And finally, the googly. This ball starts life as a leg break, but suddenly whips viciously off the wicket, spinning into the batsman instead.
Some insect anatomy now as BBC Learning Zone gets up close and personal with a tobacco hornworm.
How is insect metamorphosis controlled? I'm interested in various aspects of the process in this insect, the tobacco hornworm. Fairly obvious that all those changes of size and shape are a fairly complex bit of developmental biology. There must be a fairly sophisticated control system which controls just when all those things happen. What's exciting is that we understand at least the basics of that control system. It seems to depend on the interplay of three hormones. Let's begin the story at the beginning. Here's a caterpillar. How does it know when to molt, and how does it know how to molt? Here's a spiracle, one of the openings the caterpillar breathes through. The pale larger ring surrounding it is the outline of a new bigger spiracle being laid down underneath. To see what's happening more clearly, we need to use an electron microscope. The insect cuticle is deposited by a layer of epidermal cells. First, the old cuticle becomes separated from the epidermis and a space appears between them. This is called apolysis. Molting fluid, a mixture of enzymes, is secreted into this space. This digests away most of the old cuticle. Meanwhile, a new cuticle is being laid down. First, a thin waterproof epicuticle is deposited, and then, underneath, a much thicker procuticle. Just before apolysis, epidermis proliferates rapidly and so increases in size. This results in the epidermis being thrown into folds, and we can see this on a scanning EM picture of the new cuticle. It's already larger than the old cuticle which enclosed it. Eventually, the remains of the old cuticle are sloughed off in the spectacular event which entomologists call ecdysis, which is, of course, what most people think of as molting. But molting's a much longer process than just ecdysis. First, the insect has to lay down a new cuticle underneath the old one. Apolysis can precede ecdysis by anything from a day to several weeks. What we're going to ask is, what initiates that whole molting process? It's a question which we can answer really quite well, mainly because it's possible to manipulate insects in a way that simply isn't possible in vertebrates. To understand why, you need to know a little about insect anatomy. Here's a caterpillar cut open. Let's take a look under the microscope. Here's the gut. These tubes fanning out from the spiracles are the insect's tracheal system. They supply the tissues with oxygen direct from the air. Note that there are no blood vessels. Each tissue is simply bathed in hemolymph, which can carry the messages of hormonal control without having to bother with respiratory gases. Because of this, we can tie a ligature around the caterpillar's body. By doing that, we can divide the various body fragments from each other. The divided body fragments will survive for weeks. By doing this, we can interfere with the insect's nervous and hormonal control systems. Let's take a look at the insect's central nervous system. Here's the brain. It's relatively small. There's also a chain of segmental ganglia. Here's the first one. When we tie ligatures around the body, the ganglia will be prevented from communicating with one another, but also the endocrine glands will be isolated in particular body compartments. Ligature experiments are very important in insect endocrinology. We can use them to locate an endocrine gland within the body. In this experiment, we are assessing the importance of the head in the control of molting. Ligatures are tied around the neck, and we then wait to see if the rest of the body will molt. We can also work out when a particular hormone is released. If we tie the ligature before the hormone is secreted, the animal won't molt. If it's tied after hormone release, then it will. This is the result of a head ligature experiment from 3 days ago. The control larvae have just molted. The ligatured animals don't appear to have done much. But maybe we're being a bit unfair, because when we tied the ligature around the neck, we deprived the animal of its motor centers in its brain. But we can make use of the double spiracle effect that we saw earlier to see if there's a new cuticle being laid down. This is a larva which was ligatured 60 hours before it was due to molt. There's no large pale ring, no double spiracle. Obviously, something in the head is required for molting. In fact, it's the brain. Not so surprising when you think about it. But if I implant a brain into the body of this neck ligatured caterpillar, then it will go on to molt. This not only shows that the brain is responsible for molting, but also that proper nervous connections aren't needed. The brain must be secreting a hormone into the blood. But this hormone doesn't act directly. This is a caterpillar which a few days ago I ligatured behind the thorax. And then I implanted a brain into the isolated abdomen. Let's have a look. there's no sign of a new cuticle in the isolated abdomen, so there must be something extra in the thorax needed for molting. This something is the prothoracic gland. It's a hormone secreted by the prothoracic gland which actually causes molting. The brain simply activates the prothoracic glands. We know this because if we extirpate the glands, then the insect can no longer molt. If we reimplant the prothoracic glands, then the ability to molt is restored. The product of the prothoracic glands is a steroid called ecdysone. It seems that ecdysone is not the true molting hormone, but a precursor, a prohormone. It's converted in the tissues where it acts to 20-hydroxy-ecdysone, which is the true molting hormone. By contrast, the hormone secreted by the brain, prothoracic atropic hormone, or PTTH, is a peptide. We don't yet know its precise structure, but we think it has a relative molecular mass of about 5,000. We can locate the precise site of PTTH synthesis in the brain by bioassay techniques. With the right lighting, the cells that do the job show up in this region of the brain. We can selectively stain a pair of neurosecretory cells here on each side of the brain. Only one cell of each pair contains PTTH. It seems incredible that Manduka should rely ultimately on just 2 cells to control one of the most critical activities of its life. So that's where the hormones come from. But when are they secreted? Ligature experiments can tell us the answer. Let's start with PTTH. What we're trying to discover is the time at which it's released from the neurosecretory cells in the brain. We'll ligature between the head and the thorax at different times before the predicted time of ecdysis. From experience, we know that we need to begin about 60 hours before ecdysis, which we'll call time 0. We'll take 8 groups of 100 larvae and ligature each group at a different time. We then wait and count the number of larvae that subsequently show signs of molting. In the first group, ligatured 56 hours before ecdysis, no larvae molt. In the next group, just 4, and in the next 18, and so on. It seems that a larva is unlikely to molt if a ligature is put on earlier than minus 54 hours, but it is virtually certain to molt if the ligature is put on later than minus 49 hours. PTTH must therefore be released over a critical period, 54 to 49 hours before ecdysis. But we still don't know when ecdysone is released. We can use exactly the same technique to work this out. Now we tie the ligatures between the thorax and the abdomen. This time, the critical period seems to be between 47 and 39 hours before ecdysis. So it's over this time interval that ecdysone is released. To summarize our experiment, PTTH is released about 54 to 49 hours before ecdysis. Then there's a short delay. Ecdysone is released over the period 47 to 39 hours before molting. So it takes PTTH 1 or 2 hours to fully activate the prothoracic gland. But what is it that triggers PTTH release? Well, we're not absolutely sure, but we think that it's something to do with size. In order to initiate a molt to the 5th instar, this 4th instar caterpillar must exceed a certain critical body weight. And what's more, it must do it by a certain time of day, round about the time that the lights go off. This one didn't make it. So this enables me to predict with almost 100% accuracy that this group of larvae will initiate the molt to the finstar tomorrow. But this group of larvae will have to wait for another chance on the following day. This is because PTTH release appears to be restricted to a certain part of the day. This is governed by a biological clock in the brain. The clock may actually be in the PTTH cells themselves. This is a very useful phenomenon because it enables me to take a synchronously developing group of larvae. Obviously a very helpful thing in experiments like these. What we've covered so far tells us about the initiation of the molt. But how does the caterpillar know when to leave the plant and begin the sequence of changes which leads to a pupal molt? This is where our third hormone comes in, but it's the absence of this hormone that turns out to be important. We can cause the caterpillar to get it wrong by experimental manipulation. This is a miniature pupa. Here's the normal size version for comparison. The miniature pupa was produced by removing two small paired glandular pieces of tissue from just behind the brain of a fourth instar larva. If we implant those same pieces of glandular tissue into a fifth instar larva, then we get not a pupa, but a sixth instar giant larva. Look, he's a real monster. Let's weigh him. "14 grams. That's nearly half as much again as the biggest fifth instar larva ever weighs. Which gland causes these changes? It's not the brain, but it's linked to the brain by these two nerves. It's this gland here, called the corpus allatum. We'll take a closer look at the gland, starting in the center. The cells contain whorls of smooth ER. They're synthesizing a group of related hormones called juvenile hormones, because they promote the retention of juvenile features. We call them JHs for short. The corpus allatum also contains neurosecretory axons. These terminals in the outer sheath connect up with the PTTH cells in the brain. So this is where PTTH is released. These other neurosecretory cells are in the center of the gland. We're not really sure, but they may have something to do with the control of JH secretion. The juvenile hormones are basically long-chain esterified fatty acids. This unusual epoxide group here appears to be essential for their activity. In fact, the juvenile hormones come in several different forms. In this respect, they're rather like the vertebrate corticosteroids. We're not quite sure of the different functions of the different JHs. It may be that, like the corticosteroids, they have slightly different but overlapping functions. The juvenile hormones appear to modify the action of ecdysone. Again, let's look at the spiracle. When JH is present, ecdysone causes the epidermal cells to make a green larval cuticle. The first sign of this is the double spiracle effect. When it's absent, ecdysone makes the cells secrete a new brown pupal cuticle, which you can see underneath the old larval one. So far, we have the basic ideas that it's ecdysone which initiates the molt, being itself subject to the control of PTTH. By its presence or absence, it's JH which controls what sort of molt will occur. So, we'd expect both the JH and ecdysone levels to remain high for the first 4 instars. But when we come to the 5th instar, the one before the pupa, we'd expect JH levels to fall to 0 and ecdysone levels to remain high. Now we need to check our hypothesis by measuring the levels of the two hormones. For JH, we use a bioassay. This is a mutant of Manduka. As you can see, it's black. This is because it has lower than usual levels of JH in its blood. If I take a larva like this one, just before the molt, and I apply some JH to it, then in the next instar, it'll be green, not black. We can use this effect to measure the amount of JH in a test sample. The more JH we apply, the more the larva turns from black to green. We can assign each larva a numerical score, from 0, when it's completely black, then up through the various grades to green, which scores 5. For ecdysone, we use a radioimmunoassay. Let's have a look at the results. Juvenile hormone levels are shown by the dotted line, and ecdysone by the solid line. Juvenile hormone levels go down on day 4, but there are 2 pulses of ecdysone. This little pulse and this bigger one. Obviously, things are much more complicated than we expected. What's the reason?